Numbers didn't just change on paper. Someone changed them out loud with a smile. In a private dining room above Manhattan's glittering skyline, a broke waitress carried $300 wine like it was water, trained to vanish between crystal glasses and billion-dollar egos. But when a German investor spoke, her blood turned to ice because she understood every word. The interpreter beside the CEO was supposed to be the bridge. Instead, he was a knife. Profit split, jurisdiction, arbitration. One truth after another quietly twisted into convenient lies until the pen hovered over the contract. And then the waitress leaned in, close enough to smell the CEO's cologne, and whispered the sentence that could end her job and save his empire. Sir, your interpreter is lying. Quick question before we begin. Comment your city and your local time right now so I can see where you're listening from. If you enjoy intense romance, drama, and moral justice stories like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. And hey, grab your favorite drink, water, tea, coffee, anything. Get comfortable, because this story starts now. The Belmont Room sat 12 floors above Madison Avenue, wrapped in glass and quiet money. From the street, the building looked like any other Manhattan tower. Steel, symmetry, ambition. But inside, the Belmont was a world built for people who signed deals worth more than most New Yorkers would earn in a lifetime. A single entree cost $120. A bottle of Barolo could reach $1,800. And the waitstaff were trained in one rule above all others: be invisible. Lena Hart adjusted the black apron at her waist for the third time before pushing through the kitchen doors. The fabric was slightly faded from too many industrial washes, but she kept it immaculate. Presentation mattered here, even for those no one looked at. Private room, table 12, said Rick, the floor manager, without glancing up from his tablet. CEO from Cross Atlantic Holdings. Big German investor. Interpreters already seated. You serve, you clear, you disappear. Understood. Understood, Lena replied. She had mastered the art of disappearing. For the past 11 months, invisibility had been survival. It paid rent on her tiny Queens apartment. It covered the gap between insurance and the brutal invoices from St. Vincent's Oncology Department. It kept her mother's treatment going, chemotherapy that cost more per session than Lena earned in 2 weeks. Invisible meant safe. Invisible meant no one asked questions. But the moment she heard German drifting from the private room, something deep inside her tightened. It wasn't nerves. It was recognition. Language doesn't leave the body. It embeds itself into memory, into muscle, into breath. When the door to the private dining suite opened and she caught the crisp rhythm of native German consonants, Lena felt it like a pulse she had tried to bury. She stepped inside carrying a silver tray of crystal glasses. 3 men sat at the long walnut table beneath dim pendant lights. Closest to the window sat Ethan Cross, early 30s, dark suit, no tie, calm posture, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to own a room. His watch probably cost more than Lena's annual income. But it wasn't the watch that held power, it was the stillness. Beside him sat Blake Mercer, perfect hair, smooth smile, leather folder resting casually against his thigh. He leaned just slightly toward Ethan, like someone who had positioned himself strategically close to influence. Across from them sat Dr. Marcus Keller, broad-shouldered, precise in movement, a man who measured words before releasing them. His German carried the clarity of someone used to being understood. Lena approached quietly. "Evening, gentlemen," she said with professional warmth. "May I pour?" Ethan nodded once. She tilted the bottle carefully, letting the red wine breathe as it filled each glass. Her hands were steady, but her ears were wide open. Marcus spoke first, in German. "We are pleased to finally meet in person, Mr. Cross. This partnership could redefine our access to the North American market." The translation formed automatically in Lena's mind. Perfect. Immediate. Blake smiled and translated into English. "He says he's happy to be here and looks forward to working together." Lena blinked. That wasn't wrong. But it wasn't right either. The nuance, the scale, the ambition, gone. She told herself not to overreact. Interpreters simplify all the time. Efficiency, fluency, polishing. Ethan responded in English. I've followed Keller Biotech's expansion across Europe for years. I believe together we can build something transformative in the US and Asia Pacific. Blake turned to Marcus and spoke in German. Lena felt her fingers tighten around the bottle. Blake's version. He appreciates your company and thinks cooperation in the US could be productive. Asia Pacific vanished. Transformative became productive. Strategic admiration reduced to polite corporate filler. Marcus nodded slowly, but something in his expression shifted. Subtle, almost imperceptible. Like someone receiving a weaker signal than expected. Lena stepped back from the table, her heartbeat quickening. Maybe Blake was simplifying for clarity? Maybe. She retreated to the service station, but positioned herself where the partially closed door still carried sound. Marcus opened the printed contract. He tapped a paragraph. In Section 5, he said in German, voice calm but firm, the profit distribution reflects 60-40 in your favor. We agreed 50-50. The words were clear, unmistakable. 50-50 agreed, 60-40 written. That wasn't nuance, that was math. Blake nodded thoughtfully, then translated. Dr. Keller says he's satisfied with the financial structure and only has minor formatting concerns. The cutlery in Lena's hand slipped. It hit the counter with a sharp metallic ring. Satisfied? Formatting? Her pulse roared in her ears. From inside the room, Ethan's voice remained measured. Glad to hear that. Our legal team worked hard on it. Lena pressed her palm against the cold stainless steel counter. This wasn't simplification. This was substitution. Marcus continued in German, a little firmer now. And the arbitration clause? Why does it designate exclusive jurisdiction in New York state courts? We discussed neutral international arbitration in Geneva. Lena didn't need to translate that in her head. It carved itself into her bones. Neutral arbitration versus home court advantage. Protection versus trap. Blake didn't hesitate. He compliments the dispute resolution structure and appreciates the clarity of New York jurisdiction. Lena's breath left her body. Compliments, appreciates, clarity. She felt heat crawl up her spine. Inside that room, Marcus frowned faintly. The reaction was subtle, just a crease between his brows. A man expecting a serious reply, receiving something off. He spoke again, slower. Before signing, I require confirmation. The split remains 50-50 as negotiated. Correct? Blake smiled. He's ready to sign. No objections. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Lena imagined the pen hovering, imagined ink binding millions of dollars, and power based on lies. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She glanced down. A message from the hospital billing department. Balance due, 8,742s. Her throat tightened. If she lost this job, if Rick found out she interfered, she couldn't afford to be heroic. Heroism didn't pay medical invoices. But silence? Silence would make her complicit. Inside the room, she heard the faint scrape of a chair. Marcus's pen touched paper, and something inside Lena broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet internal fracture. The kind that happens when you recognize the same pattern that once destroyed your life. She stepped back into the private dining room, carrying the decanter like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ethan lifted his glass. Lena leaned close to refill it, close enough to speak without being heard across the table. Her voice barely above breath. Sir, your interpreter is lying. Ethan didn't move. She continued steady despite the storm in her chest. He asked about the 50-50 split. The contract says 60-40, and he objected to New York jurisdiction. Your interpreter said he praised it. The glass froze halfway to Ethan's lips. For 2 full seconds, he remained perfectly still. Then his eyes shifted slowly to meet hers. They were not angry. They were not shocked. They were calculating. Are you certain? He murmured without turning his head. Yes. Across the table, Blake was still smiling. Marcus waited, pen poised. Ethan set his glass down with deliberate care. The ground beneath that polished walnut table had just shifted, and Lena Hart had no idea whether she had saved a company or destroyed her only source of income. Ethan Cross did not react the way most men would have. He didn't slam his hand on the table. He didn't accuse. He didn't even look at Blake immediately. He simply adjusted his cufflinks and turned toward Dr. Marcus Keller with the same composed expression he had worn all evening. "Before we move forward," Ethan said calmly, "I'd like to make sure we're perfectly aligned on the financial structure." Blake's smile never faltered. "Of course," he said smoothly. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. "Blake, please ask Dr. Keller to restate his position on the profit split. I want to hear it one more time." Blake turned toward Marcus and began speaking in German. Lena stood only a few feet away, pretending to adjust the wine arrangement on the sideboard. Her hands moved automatically, but every nerve in her body was focused on the words leaving Blake's mouth. Ethan had asked Marcus to restate his position. Blake did not relay that request. Instead, he asked, "Dr. Keller, are you satisfied with the financial structure as it stands?" The difference was surgical, subtle, deadly. Marcus frowned slightly, confused but polite. He responded in German, clearly and firmly. "As I have already stated, the contract reflects 60-40. Our agreement was 50-50. I cannot sign until that discrepancy is corrected." Lena felt the air thin in her lungs. It was explicit now, clear as daylight. Blake nodded thoughtfully, turned back to Ethan, and translated, "Dr. Keller confirms he's comfortable with the financial terms and believes the split is acceptable." The lie landed like silk, soft, elegant, completely fabricated. For a fraction of a second, silence hovered over the table. Ethan did not blink, but something inside him hardened. Lena saw it. It was the look of a man who had just confirmed a suspicion and was now deciding how to dismantle it. "Interesting," Ethan said lightly. "And the arbitration clause?" Blake turned again to Marcus. This time he didn't even pretend. Instead of asking about arbitration, he said in German, "Mr. Cross is eager to close the deal tonight. Are you ready to proceed with signing?" Marcus stiffened. "No," he replied sharply. "I am still waiting for clarification regarding the arbitration clause. We agreed to neutral jurisdiction." Blake inhaled, paused barely a heartbeat too long, then faced Ethan. "He says he's ready to expedite signing tonight." The room changed, not visibly, but Lena felt it in her bones. The kind of shift that happens right before a storm breaks. Ethan placed his wine glass down with deliberate precision. He folded his hands on the table and studied Blake for a long, quiet moment. "Blake," he said, voice now lower, slower, "I'm going to do something unusual." Blake tilted his head. "Of course, Ethan." Ethan's gaze drifted, not to Marcus, but to Lena. "I'm going to ask the waitress who served us tonight to come to the table." Blake's smile flickered. Just slightly. "The waitress?" he repeated, a thin laugh escaping. "With respect, we're in the middle of a high-level international negotiation." "I didn't ask what you think," Ethan replied. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. Blake's laughter died instantly. Across the table, Marcus watched the exchange without understanding the English words, but reading the tension perfectly. His posture straightened. Lena's heart hammered as Ethan gestured toward her. "Miss," he said calmly, "would you join us?" Every unwritten rule of the Belmont shattered in that moment. Waitresses did not sit at private tables. Waitresses did not participate in negotiations. Waitresses did not become visible. But Lena stepped forward anyway. Her legs felt steady, though she could feel her pulse in her fingertips. "Yes, sir?" Ethan looked directly at her. "I'm going to say something in English," he said. "I want you to translate it into German exactly as I say it, word for word. Can you do that?" The room felt smaller, hotter. Blake shifted in his chair. "Ethan, this is unnecessary." Ethan didn't break eye contact with Lena. "Can you do it?" Lena met his gaze. "I can." Blake's jaw tightened. Ethan turned slightly toward Marcus and spoke clearly. "Dr. Keller, I apologize. I believe there have been serious issues with the translation tonight. I would like to ask you directly, what is your actual position on the profit split and the arbitration clause?" Lena inhaled slowly. Then she spoke. Her German was flawless, not textbook, not rehearsed. It carried rhythm, confidence, the natural intonation of someone who had lived inside the language. For a second, Marcus stared at her in open surprise. Then relief washed over his face like sunlight breaking through clouds. Finally, he began speaking rapidly in German. His tone sharpened with urgency. I have raised the profit discrepancy multiple times. We agreed to 50-50. The contract says 60-40. I objected to exclusive New York jurisdiction. I never praised it. I believe there was a misunderstanding, but now I see the issue is translation. Lena translated everything into English, every word, without softening, without protecting anyone. When she finished, silence fell like a physical weight. Blake had gone pale. Ethan turned to him slowly. Did Dr. Keller say at any point tonight that he was satisfied with the 60-40 split? Blake swallowed. There may have been some nuance in phrasing, yes or no. Blake's lips parted, closed. No answer came. That was answer enough. Ethan stood, not abruptly, deliberately. He buttoned his jacket. Blake, he said evenly, leave this restaurant, effective immediately. My legal team will contact you tomorrow. Blake's chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. You're making a mistake, he said tightly. Legal German can be leave. The word carried finality. Blake grabbed his folder, his hands visibly shaking now. For the first time that evening, his polished composure fractured. He walked out without looking back. The door closed behind him with a quiet, decisive click. Inside the room, the air felt different, cleaner. Marcus exhaled deeply. Ethan turned to him and, in broken but sincere German, said, I am sorry. The effort mattered. Marcus's expression softened. Lena translated the rest properly as Ethan explained that the meeting would be suspended and renegotiated with full transparency. Marcus nodded slowly. He extended his hand, not to Ethan first, but to Lena. Danke, he said simply. Thank you. The handshake was firm, respectful, not patronizing. When Marcus left the private dining room minutes later, Ethan remained standing. He looked at Lena not as a waitress, not as an employee, but as something entirely different. You didn't hesitate, he said quietly. Lena felt the weight of exhaustion suddenly press down on her. I did, she admitted. I just hesitated internally. Ethan studied her face. You understood every word. Yes. That wasn't high school German. No. A long pause. Who are you? He asked. It wasn't suspicion. It was genuine curiosity. Lena glanced down at her apron, then back up at him. I'm someone who learned the hard way what happens when a translator decides to lie. Her voice didn't tremble, but something in it carried history, pain, experience. Ethan saw it, and in that moment, this stopped being just about a fraudulent contract. Because Lena Hart wasn't simply a waitress who spoke German, she was a woman running from a past that had just collided with her present. And neither of them knew yet how deeply connected those worlds truly were. Let's pause here for a moment. If Lena had stayed silent, the contract would have been signed, millions of dollars redirected, a legal trap sealed, and she would have kept her job. No one would have blamed her. After all, she's a waitress. It wasn't her responsibility. It wasn't her company. It wasn't her risk. Or was it? When you understand the truth, clearly, undeniably, does silence become neutral? Or does it quietly make you part of the deception? And what about power? In rooms filled with executives and lawyers, why is it often the invisible person who sees the truth first? Maybe because those with less to lose sometimes recognize injustice more sharply. But Lena did have something to lose. Her income, her mother's treatment, her fragile stability. So here's the real question. When telling the truth could cost you everything, does courage still matter? Or is survival enough? We'll find out. The Belmont room emptied in layers. First, Dr. Marcus Keller left with the quiet dignity of a man who had nearly been deceived, but not broken. Then, the junior staff slipped away, clearing plates with professional efficiency, pretending not to notice the tension that had electrified the private dining suite. Within 15 minutes, only 2 people remained, Ethan Cross and Lena Hart. The skyline shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Midtown lights flickered like distant constellations. The city moved on, unaware that inside this room, a corporate betrayal had just been exposed by a woman earning $18 an hour plus tips. Ethan loosened his cufflinks and placed them carefully on the table. "Walk with me," he said. He didn't sound commanding. He sounded deliberate. Lena followed him into the narrow service corridor just outside the dining room. The scent of wine and polished wood faded into the sterile smell of stainless steel and detergent. It was the space between worlds, the front-of-house glamour and the kitchen's reality. Ethan turned to face her. His eyes were different now. Not corporate, not strategic. Focused. "You said you learned the hard way what happens when a translator lies," he said quietly. "What did you mean?" Lena hesitated. The rule had always been simple. Don't tell your story. Don't explain yourself. The apron was safer than the truth. But tonight, silence had already cost too much. "I used to work in corporate translation," she said finally. "High-level negotiations, contracts, conferences." Ethan didn't look surprised. He looked confirmed. "You weren't guessing in there." "No." "How many languages?" 7. He let out a slow breath through his nose, almost like a soundless laugh. "And now you're carrying wine trays. Now I'm paying medical bills." He didn't interrupt. Lena continued because if she stopped, she might lose the courage to finish. "I had a business partner, Grant Hale. He handled the clients. I handled the translation and interpretation work. We were trusted, certified, established." She swallowed. "He altered contract translations without telling me. Shifted terms, adjusted numbers, created advantages for clients who paid him under the table." Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When it surfaced, my name was on the documents, my credentials, my signature. And he disappeared. The word felt like gravel in her throat. "I was cleared eventually," she added, "but by then it didn't matter. My license was suspended during investigation. Clients pulled contracts. Agencies blacklisted me. In our field, suspicion is enough." The corridor felt smaller. "He destroyed your career," Ethan said flatly. "He destroyed my reputation," Lena corrected. "Careers can be rebuilt. Reputations, not so easily." Ethan studied her face as if evaluating more than just information, measuring resilience perhaps. "And your mother?" "Stage 3 lymphoma. Insurance covers some, not enough." He nodded once. The pieces aligned cleanly in his mind. "You became invisible," he said. "Yes. And tonight you chose not to be." Lena's gaze drifted to the kitchen doors at the end of the corridor. "I didn't plan to." "But you did." A quiet beat stretched between them. Then Ethan's tone shifted, subtle but decisive. "This wasn't random," he said. "What do you mean?" "Blake didn't act alone." Lena looked up sharply. Ethan leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms. "I've built Cross-Atlantic Holdings from nothing," he said calmly. "I know what incompetence looks like. That wasn't incompetence." "No," Lena agreed. "It was controlled. Strategic. Paid." Ethan nodded. "The 60-40 clause routed 10% of projected revenue into a subsidiary," he said. "A subsidiary I only recently approved." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. "And the arbitration clause?" "Would have locked us into New York jurisdiction," Ethan said, "which favors us publicly, but could be weaponized internally." Lena processed that. Weaponized. Meaning the damage wasn't necessarily aimed at Marcus. It could have been aimed at Ethan. "You think someone inside your company placed Blake there?" she asked. "I know they did." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "Why?" Lena asked. "Because the subsidiary benefiting from 60-40 is overseen by my Vice President of International Expansion." The air seemed to thin again. "And if the contract had been signed," Lena pressed, 10% siphoned quietly over 5 years would amount to roughly $28 million. $28 million. Lena felt her pulse spike. And legally, Ethan continued, it would appear clean. She stared at him. So you weren't just about to lose money, she said slowly. You were about to be trapped in someone else's scheme. Yes. And if the scheme surfaced later, I would take the fall. The simplicity of that statement made her stomach turn. A CEO blamed for corruption inside his own company. Reputation shattered. Share prices collapsing. Legal investigations, board pressure. It mirrored her own past, almost too closely. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed without hesitation. Daniel, he said when the call connected, I need a full background audit on Blake Mercer. Credentials, licensing, bank records. And I want every email between him and Victor Lang pulled immediately. Victor Lang, Vice President. Lena recognized the name from financial headlines. You suspect Lang? She asked once Ethan ended the call. I don't suspect, he replied. I evaluate patterns. And Blake was a pattern. Yes. Silence settled between them again. Then Ethan did something she didn't expect. He stepped closer, not invading, not imposing, just narrowing the distance. I need someone I can trust in that room next week, he said quietly. Marcus won't come back without assurances. Lena felt the shift before the words were fully formed. You want me, she said. I need you. Her chest tightened. No. Ethan didn't react emotionally. Why? Because my name is still searchable, she said. If anyone connects me to your company and digs into my past, the scandal resurfaces. I don't care. You should. His gaze hardened, not with anger, but conviction. An hour ago, he said, you saved me from signing a fraudulent contract that would have cost my company tens of millions and possibly destroyed my position. That was different. No, it wasn't. She shook her head. I don't want to be the risk factor in your recovery. You're not a risk, he said firmly. You're the safeguard. The words hit harder than she expected. You don't know that, she whispered. I know integrity when I see it. She let out a soft, humorless laugh. That's what I thought about Grant. Ethan didn't flinch. Then this time you won't rely on blind trust, he said. You'll rely on transparency. The city lights reflected in his eyes. I won't ask you to decide tonight, he continued, but the renegotiation is in 5 days. Marcus already requested that the waitress who speaks perfect German be present. Her breath caught. He asked for that? Yes. Something shifted inside her. Recognition. Validation. Ethan reached into his pocket again and pulled out a business card. Heavy cardstock. Minimalist design. Ethan Cross. Chief Executive Officer, Cross Atlantic Holdings. He placed it gently in her hand. My office opens at 8 a.m., he said. If you walk through those doors, we do this properly. Legal counsel, public statement if necessary, and we clear your name along the way. And if I don't, he held her gaze, then I still owe you. The corridor suddenly felt too small for the magnitude of the choice pressing against her ribs. Lena looked down at the card, at the embossed lettering, at the future it represented. She had built walls around herself for a reason. Walls kept damage out, but they also kept possibility out. I'll think about it, she said quietly. That's all I'm asking. He stepped back, restoring space between them. Finish your shift, he added. And Lena? Yes? I don't hire people because I feel sorry for them. She met his eyes. I hire people because they're necessary. For the first time that night, something inside her didn't feel like fear. It felt like the edge of something else. Something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Possibility. Lena didn't remember the rest of her shift. Her body moved through muscle memory, clearing plates, refilling water glasses, offering dessert menus with polite precision. But her mind stayed in that corridor, replaying Ethan's words. You're not a risk. You're the safeguard. By the time she clocked out, Manhattan's midnight air had turned sharp and cold. The streets shimmered with taxi lights and restless ambition. She pulled her coat tighter around her and walked 2 blocks before stopping beneath a street lamp. She took Ethan's business card out of her apron pocket. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Cross Atlantic Holdings, Midtown address, 12th floor, 5 days. Her phone buzzed. She didn't have to look at the screen to know who it was. Mom, she answered immediately. Hi, honey. Evelyn Hart's voice sounded tired but warm, like a lamp glowing in a dark room. Are you off work? Yeah. You sound different. Lena leaned against the cold brick wall of a closed boutique. Long night. Bad long or good long? Lena hesitated. Complicated long. Evelyn chuckled softly. Those are usually the important ones. Lena swallowed. I did something tonight, she said. Something I probably shouldn't have. That never stopped you before. Lena smiled faintly despite herself. There was a business dinner, she explained. Big corporate negotiation. The interpreter was altering things. In what way? Profit splits, legal clauses. Subtle, but not subtle enough. And you understood. Yes. And you said something. Yes. Silence hummed on the other end of the line. Then, Evelyn asked gently, did it cost you your job? Not yet. Then what are you afraid of? Lena closed her eyes. I'm afraid of being seen again. That was the truth she hadn't said out loud in years. Being invisible was safe. Being visible invited scrutiny, and scrutiny dug up history. Being seen isn't what destroyed you, Evelyn said quietly. Being betrayed did. Lena exhaled slowly. The CEO offered me a job, she admitted. There, it was said. A pause. A job doing what? Translation. Renegotiating the contract properly. And you don't want to accept. I don't know if I can. Why? Because my name still carries the scandal. If it resurfaces publicly, let it, Evelyn interrupted softly. Lena blinked. Mom? Lena, Evelyn said firmly. You didn't do what Grant did, you survived it. Those are two different things. Lena felt tears sting unexpectedly. I don't want to drag someone else into that mess. If he's asking you to help, he's choosing the risk. The words lingered. After they hung up, Lena stood under that street lamp for a long time. Then, she slid the card back into her pocket and headed toward the subway. The next morning, she arrived at St. Vincent's before visiting hours officially began. The nurse at reception recognized her immediately. Room 412, the nurse said with a small smile. She's been asking for you. Evelyn looked smaller in the hospital bed than Lena remembered from childhood memories. Thinner, paler. But her eyes were still sharp. You look like you didn't sleep, Evelyn observed. I didn't. Good, her mother replied. Lena frowned. Good? Big decisions require insomnia. Lena laughed softly. She sat beside the bed and told her everything. Not the condensed version, the full version, the altered translation, the profit split, the arbitration clause, the confrontation, Blake's dismissal, the internal betrayal at Cross Atlantic, and the offer. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When Lena finished, the room felt heavy with unspoken implications. So, what's the real reason you're hesitating? Evelyn asked. Lena stared at her hands. I'm scared that if I step back into that world, I'll fail again. You didn't fail before, Evelyn corrected. I signed documents I trusted without reading every clause. You trusted someone you loved. That's not an excuse. It's human. Lena looked up sharply. Evelyn reached for her daughter's hand. Courage isn't the absence of fear, she said gently. It's deciding something matters more than fear. The words settled in Lena's chest. She had heard them before, from her father, years ago, before everything fractured. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She stepped into the hallway to answer. Lena Hart, she said cautiously. Miss Hart, a measured male voice replied. My name is Daniel Ross. I'm general counsel for Cross Atlantic Holdings. Her pulse quickened. Yes? I'm calling with an update regarding last night's incident. Go ahead. We completed a preliminary investigation into Blake Mercer, and he does not hold an active federal certification for legal translation. His credentials are from a private institution that closed 3 years ago. Lena closed her eyes. And Victor Lang, she asked? A brief pause. You're perceptive, Daniel said. There is email correspondence between Mr. Mercer and Mr. Lang indicating direct instructions to minimize objections from Dr. Keller. Her stomach tightened. Was there financial incentive? Yes. Daniel's tone remained professional, but the weight of the answer carried through. The altered 60-40 structure redirected funds into a subsidiary tied to an offshore account linked to Mr. Lang. Lena pressed her palm against the hospital corridor wall. "And Grant Hale?" she asked quietly. Silence. Then, there is documentation showing Mr. Hale acted as an external consultant for that offshore entity. The world tilted slightly. "So it's connected," she whispered. "We are still investigating," Daniel replied carefully, "but the pattern is consistent." Lena's chest tightened. The past hadn't just followed her. It had been waiting. "Mr. Cross asked me to inform you," Daniel continued, "that the offer stands, and that he believes your involvement is critical." "Does he know about Grant?" "Yes. And he is not deterred." Lena ended the call and stood motionless in the corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Her reflection stared back from a darkened window. For years, she had believed stepping forward would only invite more damage, but staying hidden hadn't erased anything either. It had only delayed confrontation. She returned to her mother's room. "Well?" Evelyn asked. "It's bigger than I thought," Lena said quietly. "Of course it is." Lena sat back down. "If I accept," she said, "I'm stepping into a fight." Evelyn squeezed her hand. "Then, step in prepared." Lena looked at her mother, frail, fighting, brave in ways that didn't make headlines. "I don't want to lose again," Lena admitted. "You already lost once," Evelyn said gently, "and you're still here." That was true. Still here. Still breathing. Still capable. Outside the hospital window, the city pulsed with relentless motion. Lena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out Ethan's card again. She stared at the address. Midtown, 12th floor. A different world, but not unreachable. Her fear was still there. But beneath it, something steadier had begun to grow. Resolve. "I'm going to see him," she said finally. Evelyn smiled. "I know." Lena stood, kissed her mother's forehead, and walked out of the hospital with a different posture than she'd carried in. Not confident, not fearless, but decided. 5 days until renegotiation. And for the first time in years, Lena Hart was no longer running from the past. She was walking toward it. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt longer than the subway ride, from Queens to Midtown. Lena stood alone in the mirrored box, watching her reflection multiply around her. No apron, no tray, just a navy blouse, black slacks, and the same flat shoes she'd worn to work the night before. She hadn't tried to look corporate. She hadn't tried to look impressive. She had decided to look like herself. When the doors opened, she wasn't greeted by a receptionist. Ethan Cross was standing in the hallway, not behind a desk, not flanked by assistants, just standing there, hands loosely clasped in front of him, as if he had been waiting long enough to start counting seconds. He nodded once. "You came." "I said I'd think about it." "And?" "I thought." A faint corner of his mouth lifted. "Come in." His office was sleek but restrained. Glass desk, bookshelves lined with actual books, not decorative spines. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan like a living map of ambition. Lena took it in without awe. Rooms like this used to be familiar to her. Conference halls in DC, boardrooms in Chicago, trade summits in Geneva. She had once belonged in rooms where decisions shaped markets. She sat across from Ethan's desk. "So," he said calmly, "let's remove the romance from this." "Romance?" she repeated. "The idea of redemption," he clarified. "This isn't that. This is a strategic decision." She appreciated that. "No charity," she said. "No charity." He opened a folder and slid it across the desk. Daniel finished the initial audit. Lena opened it. Email threads, bank transfers, wire confirmations. And there, highlighted in yellow, Victor Lang's message to Blake Mercer. Keep objections vague. Redirect questions about revenue allocation. He doesn't understand German. Use that. Her jaw tightened. "That's explicit," she said. "Yes." She flipped another page. Financial routing diagrams, offshore entities, layered subsidiaries. And then she saw it. Grant Hale. Her breath caught. His name appeared as an external consultant, receiving advisory payments from Victor's offshore structure. The room seemed to tilt. Ethan watched her closely. "You see it," he said quietly. "He's tied to Lang," Lena whispered. "We don't know the depth yet," Ethan replied, "but the connection exists." For years, she had believed Grant's betrayal was an isolated wound, personal, tragic. Now it looked strategic, calculated, possibly part of something larger. "I need you to understand something," Ethan said carefully. "If you step into this negotiation next week, it won't just be about correcting a contract. It will trigger internal exposure. Victor won't stay quiet," she said. "No. And if Grant is tied to him, he may surface." Lena closed the folder slowly. Fear flickered. But it wasn't paralyzing this time. It was clarifying. "You're asking me to testify with my voice?" And she said, "Again. I'm asking you to be accurate." She met his gaze. "And if the media dredges up my old case, they will." He didn't sugarcoat it. "But this time," he continued, "we control the narrative." "How?" "Transparency." He stood and walked to the window. "When this surfaces, and it will, I'll issue a public statement. Cross-Atlantic was targeted internally. We corrected it. We are cooperating with federal investigators, and the interpreter who exposed it has a documented history of being framed in a similar scheme." "That makes me look like a victim," she said. "It makes you look consistent." She absorbed that. Consistency, not scandal, pattern. "You'd attach your company's name to mine?" she asked. "Yes." No hesitation. The weight of that answer pressed into her chest. Most executives would have distanced themselves from controversy. Ethan was stepping toward it. "Why?" she asked quietly. He turned from the window. "Because integrity isn't negotiable for me," he said. "And because someone inside my company tried to weaponize language." His jaw tightened slightly. "My father built this company," he continued, "from nothing. He always said that trust is the only currency that compounds." Lena recognized the conviction in his tone. He wasn't protecting money. He was protecting principle. "And you think I can help you restore that?" she asked. "I know you can." Silence stretched between them. Then Ethan shifted gears. "Marcus Keller confirmed attendance for next Tuesday," he said. "He requested you by name." Her pulse skipped. "He doesn't even know my last name. He asked for the waitress who refused to lie." Something fragile moved inside her, not pride, recognition. "You'll sit at the table as an independent language consultant," Ethan continued. "Legal counsel present, compliance present, full audio recording, no shadows." "And Victor?" "On administrative leave pending investigation." "He'll fight," Lena said. "Yes." "Grant?" "We're coordinating with federal authorities. Financial Crimes Division is already reviewing offshore movement." For a moment, the magnitude of it overwhelmed her. This wasn't just corporate fraud. It was layered, interconnected. Her past wasn't random collateral damage. It had been part of a system. "You look like you're calculating," Ethan observed. "I am. Walk me through it." She leaned forward slightly. If Victor orchestrated the 60-40 split, he needed someone fluent enough to manipulate German, but incompetent enough to control. That's Blake. Yes. And if Grant is consulting offshore, he likely advised Victor on how to structure translation manipulation without triggering compliance flags. Ethan's eyes sharpened, which means Grant learned from using my credentials. He refined the method. Silence followed. "Then this isn't just a renegotiation," Ethan said slowly. "It's a dismantling." "Yes. And you're willing to be at the center of it?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around the office, at the skyline, at the polished table, at the version of herself reflected faintly in the window. She had spent years believing survival meant staying small. But staying small hadn't prevented this. It had only delayed her return. "If I do this," she said finally, "I won't soften anything. I don't want you to. I won't protect egos. Good. And if questions get uncomfortable, they should. Their eyes held. Not romantically. Not yet. But there was alignment, mutual recognition. I accept, Lena said. The words felt steady. Ethan didn't celebrate. He extended his hand, professional, firm. She shook it. The contact wasn't electric. It was grounding. Welcome back, he said quietly. To what? She asked. To the table. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. For years she had stood behind tables. Now she would sit at one again, equal, visible, necessary. But as she left the office later that morning, stepping back into the midtown crowd, she felt something else too. A tremor beneath the surface. Because somewhere, Victor Lang was realizing his plan had unraveled. And somewhere else, Grant Hale might be hearing her name again. The past wasn't just catching up, it was preparing to respond. And this time, Lena Hart would not be invisible. Let's pause again. When someone has been publicly broken once, does the world get to demand their courage a second time? Lena could have stayed safe. She could have walked away after exposing Blake. No one would blame her for choosing peace over confrontation. But justice is rarely convenient, and here's the uncomfortable truth. Integrity often requires stepping back into the arena that hurt you. Is Ethan right to involve her, knowing it may reopen wounds? Or is it exploitation masked as opportunity? And what about Lena? Is she brave or reckless for returning to the very battlefield where she was once defeated? Sometimes moral justice doesn't arrive wrapped in applause. Sometimes it arrives as a choice to stand where you once fell and speak clearly, even when your voice shakes. Next week, Lena won't be carrying wine. She'll be carrying truth, and truth has enemies. The days leading up to Tuesday moved with deceptive calm. On the surface, Cross Atlantic Holdings continued as usual. Press releases went out, quarterly projections were updated, analysts speculated about expansion into European biotech markets. But inside the executive floor, the atmosphere had shifted. Victor Lang's office sat dark. Access revoked, security badges deactivated. Officially, he was on leave pending internal review. Unofficially, everyone knew something was wrong. Lena arrived at the building Monday afternoon for final preparation. She no longer entered through the side lobby, like staff. She signed in at the main desk, escorted upstairs by Daniel Ross. Still, she felt eyes on her. Whispers, curiosity. She ignored it. Conference room 12 overlooked the Hudson River. The boardroom table was long, polished, severe. Audio equipment was set up discreetly along the center. Legal counsel would be seated on both sides. This wasn't dinner under dim lighting. This was controlled exposure. Daniel handed her a revised contract draft. 50-50 profit split, he said. Neutral arbitration in Geneva. Full audit transparency clauses. She scanned the pages quickly. Precise, clean. But she knew better than to assume safety. Victor's attorney requested access to internal documents this morning, Daniel added. Which means, Lena asked, he's preparing a counter-narrative. Blaming Blake alone, she guessed. Likely. Lena nodded. That won't hold if the financial routing connects directly. No, Daniel hesitated. There's something else. Her pulse quickened. What? A financial crimes investigator reached out this morning. Offshore transfers tied to Victor's subsidiary also linked to an external consultant account registered under Grant Hale. Her throat tightened. So it's confirmed. Preliminarily, she closed the contract draft slowly. Grant wasn't just a ghost anymore. He was active. Still building schemes, still using language as a weapon. Tuesday morning arrived gray and heavy. Lena dressed carefully, not extravagantly. A charcoal blazer, subtle makeup, hair down, deliberate but understated. She wasn't trying to look powerful. She was trying to look unafraid. When she stepped into conference room 12, Ethan was already there. He didn't comment on her appearance. He simply nodded once. You ready? Yes. Remember, he said quietly, you're not here to defend yourself. I'm here to translate. Exactly. At 9:03 a.m., Dr. Marcus Keller entered with his legal advisor. He spotted Lena immediately. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. He extended his hand. "Miss Hart," he said in careful English, "I am glad to see you again." She switched seamlessly into German. "I'm glad as well, Dr. Keller. This time, everything will be clear." He smiled faintly. "I expect nothing less." The meeting began. Daniel outlined procedural transparency. All statements recorded. Both parties allowed clarification requests directly. No intermediaries beyond certified counsel. Then Ethan spoke, calm, controlled. "Dr. Keller, I want to begin by acknowledging that what occurred last week was unacceptable." Lena translated word for word. "No polishing, no softening." Marcus responded, "In my experience, trust once broken is rarely repaired. However, your response last week suggested good faith." Lena conveyed the statement precisely. Ethan nodded. "Good faith must be demonstrated, not declared." The conversation moved into financial structure. Profit split, 50-50. Projected 5-year revenue estimates, distribution mechanics. Marcus raised a question about revenue timing. Lena translated cleanly. No hesitation, no interpretation layered in. Ethan adjusted his proposal accordingly. Lawyers clarified language. Each clause moved across the table like chess pieces. Deliberate, strategic, transparent. For 2 hours, it flowed. Professional, precise. Until Daniel's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed. Lena saw it immediately. He leaned toward Ethan and whispered something. Ethan's jaw tightened. "What?" Marcus asked in German. Lena didn't translate yet. She waited. Ethan exhaled slowly. "There has been an anonymous tip sent to 3 financial media outlets," he said evenly, referencing a previous translation scandal involving Miss Hart. The room went still. Lena felt the words land before she translated them. Her pulse spiked, but she did not freeze. She translated calmly. Marcus's eyes shifted to her, not accusatory, assessing. The German legal advisor leaned toward him, whispering quickly. Here it was, the counterattack. Victor had moved faster than expected. Anonymity was predictable. Timing was strategic. Ethan spoke again. "I was informed of Miss Hart's previous case before inviting her to participate today." Lena translated. "She was cleared of wrongdoing. Evidence now suggests her former partner was engaged in conduct structurally similar to what we uncovered within my own company." Marcus studied her carefully. "Is that accurate?" he asked her directly in German. For the first time in the meeting, the question bypassed Ethan. It was personal. Lena met his gaze. "Yes," she said. "My credentials were used without my knowledge to alter translations for financial gain. I did not participate. I did not benefit. And I refused to remain silent when I saw similar manipulation last week." Silence lingered. Her voice had not shaken, not even slightly. Marcus leaned back slowly. "Transparency now is more valuable than silence then," he said. She translated. Ethan's shoulders eased subtly. The legal advisor whispered again, weighing reputational risk. Finally, Marcus nodded once. "We proceed," he said firmly. Relief did not flood the room. Resolve did. They returned to the contract, clause by clause. Every term clarified. Audit provisions strengthened. Language cross-checked twice. By noon, the agreement stood balanced. When Marcus lifted the pen this time, it did not hover in uncertainty. He signed. Ethan signed. The lawyers exchanged copies. The deal was sealed, not through manipulation, but through precision. As documents were gathered, Marcus stood and extended his hand to Lena again. "Miss Hart," he said in German. "Today I heard Mr. Cross clearly." She translated softly for Ethan. Ethan looked at her. "Every word matters," he said quietly. She nodded. After Marcus left, the room emptied quickly. Only Ethan and Lena remained. Outside the glass walls, Manhattan buzzed unaware. They went after you fast, Ethan said. They were prepared. Does it scare you? Yes. He didn't flinch at her honesty. But I'm more afraid of staying silent, she added. He studied her. Victor won't stop easily, he said. And Grant? She asked. We're closing in. She exhaled slowly. For years, she had feared her past resurfacing. Now it had. And she was still standing. Not ruined, not erased. Standing. The bridge had held, but storms were gathering. Because somewhere across the city, Victor Lang was no longer fighting for profit. He was fighting for survival. And desperate men rarely retreat quietly. The news cycle moved faster than any courtroom ever could. By Wednesday morning, 3 financial blogs had published variations of the same headline. Former translator in corporate fraud case resurfaces in New York. Biotech deal. The wording was careful, non-accusatory, but sharp enough to reopen wounds. Lena read the articles from Ethan's office couch while Daniel handled calls in the hallway. They mentioned her name, referenced the old investigation, included a dated photo from a conference panel in Chicago, 7 years ago, back when she still wore confidence like a second skin. They did not mention that she had been cleared. They did not mention Grant's disappearance. They did not mention that the current fraud attempt had been stopped because she refused to lie. Narratives were selective, always had been. Ethan stood near the window, reading the same article on his tablet. They're testing pressure points, he said calmly. Lena lowered the screen. Victor? Almost certainly. And the board? They're concerned about optics. Translation? They're concerned about stock price. He gave her a brief glance of acknowledgement. Yes. She closed her eyes for a moment. It felt familiar. That tightening in the chest. The sensation of watching your name shift from person to headline. You don't have to keep me in this, she said quietly. Ethan turned fully toward her. I told you, he replied. You're not a liability. Your board might disagree. My board doesn't get to rewrite facts. The firmness in his voice surprised her. He walked over and set the tablet down. Here's what matters, he continued. Marcus Keller signed yesterday. The deal stands. Federal investigators have requested Victor's financial records. And this morning, Grant Hale's consulting account was flagged in 2 separate offshore compliance audits. Her breath stilled. He's cornered, she said. Yes. And cornered men attack. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Then we don't flinch. The words were steady, but Lena could see calculation beneath them. This wasn't just corporate defense. This was controlled escalation. Daniel returned, closing the office door behind him. Victor's attorney is demanding a board review, he said. He claims wrongful suspension. Ethan didn't react immediately. Evidence? Strong enough for probable cause, Daniel replied. Wire transfers, email directives, the offshore link to Grant. And media? Lena asked. Daniel looked at her with measured respect. Contained for now. But if Victor pushes publicly, your past will be used. She nodded slowly. I expected that. Ethan studied her face. Are you still standing? He asked quietly. She met his gaze. Yes. Not bravado. Truth. That evening, Lena returned to St. Vincent's. Her mother was sitting upright, flipping through a magazine she clearly wasn't reading. You've been trending, Evelyn said dryly. Lena blinked. You saw? I have nurses with smartphones. Despite everything, Lena laughed. They're trying to drag it back up, she admitted. And I didn't fall apart. Evelyn smiled softly. That's growth. Lena sat beside the bed. For years, I thought if the scandal resurfaced, it would destroy me again, she said. And now? It feels smaller. Evelyn reached for her hand. Because you're not hiding anymore? Lena nodded. There was power in that realization. The scandal had thrived in silence, but exposure under truth had less weight. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. She stepped into the hallway to answer. We located Grant, Daniel said immediately. Her heart pounded. Where? Miami. Under a consulting contract with a shell logistics firm. Financial activity ties directly to Victor's offshore structure. Is he cooperating? Not yet. She closed her eyes briefly. Does he know I'm involved? Likely. A chill slid down her spine. Be cautious, Daniel added. We've requested protective measures if needed. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. When she returned to her mother's room, her expression had changed. He's been found, she said quietly. Evelyn didn't ask who. She knew. Good, her mother replied. Good? You can't close a chapter without locating the last page? Lena exhaled slowly. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even closure. It was exposure. Grant's manipulation had followed her into another life. Now it was being traced back to its source. Friday morning brought another development. Federal agents arrived at Cross Atlantic's headquarters with formal documentation. Victor Lang was escorted out mid-morning. Discreet, controlled, but unmistakable. Employees watched from glass-walled offices as he passed through the lobby. His expression was rigid, his posture defensive. He did not look at Lena, but she saw him glance at Ethan. Not fear, hatred. By noon, financial networks were reporting an internal compliance investigation at Cross Atlantic. Victor's name was not yet released publicly, but it would be. Daniel entered Ethan's office shortly after. Grant Hale has been served a subpoena, he said. Bank records are frozen. Lena sat very still. For years, she had imagined this moment. Confrontation, exposure, accountability. But now that it was unfolding, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady. The difference mattered. Ethan leaned back in his chair. This won't be quick, he said. It doesn't have to be, Lena replied. He studied her. You're different than you were a week ago. So are you. A faint, almost imperceptible smile flickered between them. Something had shifted. Not romance, not yet. Respect, shared battle, shared clarity. You know, Ethan said quietly, when my father built this company, he told me something. Lena tilted her head. He said the most dangerous weapon in business isn't money. It's narrative. She nodded slowly. And right now, he continued, we control the narrative. Because we told the truth first, she said. Yes. The simplicity of it struck her. Truth, when spoken early, anchors events. Lies require constant maintenance. Truth stands. Outside the window, Manhattan pulsed with its usual indifference. Deals signed, deals broken. Reputations rising. Reputations falling. But inside that office, something else had happened. A waitress had stepped into a boardroom. A CEO had chosen transparency over concealment. A corrupt executive had been exposed, and the man who once destroyed her career was no longer untouchable. Lena stood and walked toward the window. I used to think language was just a tool, she said softly. And now? Ethan asked. Now I know it's leverage, he nodded. And leverage changes power. Her phone buzzed again. A notification, an updated article. This time the headline read, Cross Atlantic exposes internal fraud attempt. Independent consultant played key role. She stared at it. Not erased, not vilified, recognized. Ethan stepped beside her. You okay? He asked quietly. She inhaled slowly. Yes. And this time, she meant it fully. Because the past had resurfaced. The attack had come, and she was still standing. But somewhere in Miami, Grant Hale was reading those same headlines. And unlike Victor, Grant had something personal to lose. He hadn't just lost money. He had lost control over the narrative he once used to bury her. And men who thrive on control rarely surrender quietly. The next move wouldn't be corporate, it would be personal. And Lena felt it coming. The call came at 7:14 a.m. on a Sunday. Lena was still in bed, sunlight barely filtering through the blinds of her Queens apartment, when her phone vibrated against the nightstand. Unknown number. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. Then, she answered. Lena Hart. A voice she hadn't heard in years responded. Calm, familiar, poisoned with history. Still correcting other people's contracts, I see. Her blood ran cold. Grant Hale. She didn't sit up abruptly. She didn't gasp. She didn't give him the reaction he wanted. Yes, she said evenly, and still reading them carefully. A soft chuckle traveled through the line. "I always admired that about you," he said. "You were thorough. Just not thorough enough." Her jaw tightened. "You're under investigation," she replied. "Calling me isn't wise. Neither is playing hero in a corporate fraud case. The old tactics, subtle intimidation wrapped in sarcasm." "You attached yourself to Cross-Atlantic," Grant continued. "You think that protects you? It protects the truth." He scoffed lightly. "Truth is flexible. You taught me that." "No," she said calmly. "You exploited that." Silence crackled for a beat. "You could have stayed invisible," he said. "You were safer that way." There it was. Control through fear. "You miscalculated," she replied. "Oh, you assumed I was still afraid." Another quiet pause. "You should be," Grant said softly. "Victor's not the only one with leverage." Her pulse quickened, but her voice didn't. "Threatening me on a recorded line isn't leverage." He exhaled through his nose. "Relax, Lena. I'm not threatening you, I'm advising you. Save it. You don't know how deep this goes." "Neither do you," she shot back. That time his breath hitched slightly. He hadn't expected pushback. "You built your career on trust," he said. "You think these people won't turn on you the second stock dips?" "They already tested that," she replied. "And I'm still here." A long silence stretched between them. The balance had shifted. Grant finally spoke again, voice colder now. "This isn't over." "It never was," she said. She ended the call. Her hands were steady. Only after the screen went dark did she allow herself one slow, deliberate breath. He wasn't calling to intimidate. He was calling to assess. And he'd heard what he didn't expect. She wasn't broken. By noon, Lena was at Cross-Atlantic's office. Ethan listened without interruption as she recounted the call. "Did he threaten you directly?" Daniel asked. "No," she replied. "He implied exposure, suggested there are deeper layers." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "He's testing whether we're rattled." "We're not," Lena said. Daniel studied her face carefully. "You're remarkably composed." She met his gaze. "I've already survived him once." Ethan's jaw tightened. "From this point forward, any communication goes through counsel," he said firmly. "He doesn't get access to you." Lena nodded. "I don't need protection from his voice," she said quietly. "That's not the point," Ethan replied. She held his gaze. For a second, something unspoken moved between them. Concern. Not corporate, personal. He looked away first. "We're filing formal charges Monday," Daniel added. "Financial conspiracy, fraudulent misrepresentation, federal jurisdiction." Lena absorbed that. "This will go public," she said. "Yes." "Good." Ethan looked at her sharply. "You want it public?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because secrets are where people like Grant thrive." Silence followed. Then Ethan nodded slowly. "Then we burn it clean." Monday morning exploded. Federal filings were made. Victor Lang's name was formally released. Grant Hale's involvement surfaced within hours. Financial news outlets shifted tone. This wasn't a resurfaced scandal about a translator. It was a coordinated internal fraud attempt involving executive manipulation and offshore consulting. Lena's name appeared again, but differently. Whistleblower language consultant identifies manipulated translation in corporate scheme. The narrative had changed. Not victim, not suspect. Whistleblower. She stood in Ethan's office reading the article, while media trucks began appearing outside the building. "Press conference at 2 p.m., Daniel announced. Lena looked up. "I'm not speaking." "No," Ethan agreed. "I am." The conference room downstairs filled quickly. Cameras, microphones, flashing lights. Lena watched from behind the glass upstairs. Ethan stood at the podium, calm, composed, direct. Cross-Atlantic Holdings uncovered internal misconduct involving the manipulation of contract translations for financial gain, he stated clearly. An independent language consultant identified discrepancies that prevented a fraudulent agreement from being executed. He didn't say her name immediately. He didn't sensationalize. He framed facts. "Our company takes responsibility for internal oversight," he continued. "We have cooperated fully with federal authorities and are committed to full transparency. A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Cross, is it true the consultant involved has a prior history connected to translation fraud?" There it was, the pivot. Ethan didn't flinch. "It is true that years ago, she was wrongfully implicated in a case where her credentials were misused by a former business partner. That individual is now under investigation in this case as well." Direct. Unapologetic. The narrative locked into place. Lena exhaled slowly as the room absorbed the clarity. No evasion, no distancing. Ethan didn't shield her. He validated her. When the conference ended, Daniel returned upstairs. "Victor's attorney just called," he said. "He's negotiating." "For what?" Lena asked. "Reduced charges in exchange for cooperation." "And Grant?" Still silent. Ethan turned to Lena. "He's cornered." "Yes, and desperate men escalate." She nodded. "I know." That afternoon, Lena returned to St. Vincent's. Evelyn looked brighter than she had in weeks. "They're saying your name on television," her mother said with a faint smile. Lena sat beside her. "They're saying it correctly this time." Evelyn squeezed her hand. "Does it feel different?" "Yes." "How?" "Like I'm not hiding from it anymore." Evelyn nodded softly. "That's power." Lena rested her forehead briefly against her mother's hand. "I thought confronting him would feel like revenge," she admitted quietly. "And it feels like closure." Evelyn smiled. "Closure isn't loud," she said. "It's steady." That evening, Lena walked out of the hospital into a city that looked the same, but felt altered. The wind off the East River was sharp. Cars rushed past. Billboards flickered above. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "You handled that call with him better than I would have." She smiled faintly. "Experience?" she replied. A pause. Then another message. "Dinner?" "Not a negotiation, just dinner." Her breath caught. Not corporate, not strategic. Human. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back. Yes, the past had resurfaced. The attack had come. The truth had held. Victor was negotiating. Grant was cornered. And for the first time in years, Lena Hart wasn't defined by what had been taken from her. She was defined by what she had refused to surrender. Her voice. The restaurant Ethan chose that night wasn't 12 floors above Manhattan. It wasn't private. It wasn't theatrical. It was quiet. Warm lighting, brick walls, a place where no one expected billion-dollar negotiations. Just conversations. Lena arrived first. Not because she was nervous, because she needed a moment. She stood outside the entrance for a few seconds, watching people pass on the sidewalk. Couples arguing gently over directions. A man walking his dog. A woman balancing groceries in her phone. Ordinary life, unaware of offshore accounts, manipulated clauses, and corporate conspiracies. She exhaled slowly and stepped inside. Ethan arrived 3 minutes later. No suit jacket this time. Just a dark sweater and rolled sleeves. Less CEO, more man. "You look different without a podium," she said lightly. "You look different without a boardroom," he replied. They both smiled. Not because everything was solved, but because something had shifted. They ordered food without discussing contracts. For the first time since that night at the Belmont, there were no documents between them. Just plates, glasses, space. "Victor accepted a plea agreement this afternoon," Ethan said eventually. Lena's fork paused midair. "Already? He's trading information for reduced sentencing. And Grant? He's negotiating. Meaning? He wants immunity." Lena's jaw tightened. "For what?" "For testimony against Victor." She leaned back slowly. "That's classic," she said. "Burn the bigger fish to save himself." "Yes." "And will he get it?" Ethan met her eyes. "Not without full disclosure." She studied him carefully. "You're not doing this for revenge." "No." "For reputation?" "Partially." "For justice?" "Yes." The words settled between them. Justice. It didn't feel theatrical. It felt procedural, grounded. "I don't want him destroyed," Lena said quietly. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "You don't?" "I want him accountable," she clarified. "There's a difference." Ethan nodded slowly. I agree. The simplicity of that alignment surprised her. For years, she had imagined facing Grant again would require rage. Instead, it required steadiness. You didn't hesitate at the press conference, she said softly. I meant what I said. I know. He looked at her with a quiet intensity. You gave me the opportunity to choose integrity publicly, he said. That's rare. She shook her head gently. I just refused to lie. That's more radical than you think. Silence settled comfortably between them. Outside the restaurant windows, the city moved in its usual rhythm. Lena realized something. For years, her life had been divided. Before Grant, after Grant. Invisible, visible, waitress, translator. But sitting there, she didn't feel divided. She felt integrated, whole. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from Daniel. Grant Hale formally charged. No immunity deal finalized. Federal hearing scheduled. She stared at the screen for a moment, then set the phone down. It's happening, she said. Ethan nodded. Are you okay? She searched herself honestly. Yes. Not triumphant, not bitter, steady. A few days later, Lena stood in a federal courthouse hallway, not as a defendant, not as a suspect, as a witness. Grant Hale was escorted in through a side door. For the first time in years, she saw him face to face. He looked older, less polished, more tired. Their eyes met briefly. There was no smirk this time. No subtle superiority, just calculation. And underneath it, defeat. He didn't speak to her. He didn't need to. The system was speaking for both of them now. Victor's testimony outlined financial routing, email directives, offshore coordination. Grant's advisory role, the structure was exposed in full daylight. When Lena took the stand, her voice did not shake. She described how translation manipulation works, how altering a single clause shifts millions of dollars, how trust becomes the gateway for fraud. And when asked about her own past case, she didn't shrink. Yes, she said clearly, my credentials were misused. I trusted the wrong person. That does not make me complicit. It makes me human. The courtroom was quiet. No headlines, no drama. Just record. Truth entered into evidence. When the hearing concluded weeks later, formal charges were solidified. Grant's leverage collapsed. Victor's cooperation sealed his plea. The scheme dismantled. Not through spectacle, through documentation. A month later, Lena returned to St. Vincent's with different news. Evelyn sat upright, color faintly returning to her cheeks. The latest scans show stabilization, Lena said softly. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. Stable is good, Evelyn whispered. Stable is very good. They held hands. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, Evelyn looked at her daughter carefully. You look lighter. I am. Because of the court? Because I stopped hiding. Evelyn smiled. That's what your father meant. Lena swallowed. About bridges? Yes. Words are bridges, Margot. No, Lena corrected herself silently. Words are bridges, Lena? Her father had said that when she was 12, sitting at a diplomatic dinner table in D.C., bored and curious. She hadn't understood it then. Now she did. Language connects. It can deceive, but it can also expose. And when used with integrity, it restores balance. Later that evening, Lena walked out of the hospital and found Ethan waiting by his car. You don't have to keep picking me up, she said. I know. She smiled. They walked slowly toward the parking garage. Cross Atlantic offered you a permanent contract, he said. I know. And? I accepted. He didn't look surprised. Independent language oversight, she continued. Full transparency role. You're building something, he said. Yes. Not just for me. No. She stopped walking for a moment. I'm building it for the version of myself who thought silence was safer. Ethan stepped closer. And what would you tell her now? Lena thought carefully. That courage isn't loud, she said. It's consistent. He smiled faintly. That sounds like something you should put on a wall. Maybe. They reached the car. He opened the passenger door. She paused. Ethan? Yes? Thank you. For what? For choosing transparency when it was easier to contain it. He met her gaze. You made it impossible not to. She laughed softly. Not the nervous laugh from weeks ago, a real one. They drove into the city night. No flashing lights, no breaking news banners. Just two people who had stood at the edge of something and chosen not to step back. And somewhere in Manhattan, the Belmont Room still served wine to men who thought power made them untouchable. But now there was one less silent bridge in that world. Because Lena Hart had learned something vital. Life doesn't always place you at the table where decisions are made. Sometimes it puts you behind a tray, behind a counter, behind a name that's been questioned. But when the moment arrives, when truth stands on one side and fear on the other, you get to choose which side you speak for. And that choice, that's power. Sometimes we believe survival means shrinking, staying quiet, staying small, staying invisible. We tell ourselves that if no one sees us, no one can hurt us. But silence doesn't protect integrity. It only postpones its test. Lena's story isn't about corporate fraud. It's about the moment when someone who has every reason to remain quiet chooses to speak anyway. It's about understanding that your past does not disqualify you from your future. That being betrayed once does not mean you are broken forever. Courage is rarely dramatic. It doesn't always come with applause. Often, it looks like a quiet voice leaning in and saying, "This isn't right." And that is enough to change everything. If this story moved you, share in the comments where you're watching from and what part of Lena's journey resonated with you the most. Subscribe if you believe in stories about redemption, integrity, and second chances. And don't forget, drink some water. Take care of your body while you build your bridges, because your voice matters more than you think.